I was one of the many people that fell victim to the extreme, excessive brutality the police inflicted upon us. We were on 5th and near Thackeray when they began to gas a non-opposing group of people who, without warning, we instantly began to panic. I turned to flee the area and I instantly got shot in my right leg.
Stephen can show you that spoke
Jesus. What were these rubber pellets?
Yeah, I got shot in
your
right leg.
Can you stand in the chair maybe?
No, that's
and show your arm.
Also my back of my arm.
Can you see your arm again, please? What do I say?
But we were gassed. I was shot 4 times within 5 seconds. We ran up to North Bouquet to escape it, and actually were being gassed from that side as well. Students started jumping up onto the lich-filled deck. It's a 7-foot jump. People were climbing up onto it. They began gassing onto the deck. Students started fleeing into the towers. As much gas as students were going into the building. Everybody was coughing. Girls were crying. They detained us in there for 45 minutes and didn't let us go. They came in, picked a few people out, detained them, and then anybody that lived off campus, they let go. I eventually made my way to the original hot dog shop where I was recommended to get medical treatment for my wounds. And I eventually went to the UPMC Presbyterian and received medical treatment for 4 contusions.
Do you have any idea how far away the muzzle was when you were shot?
The first 2 on my knees was at least no more than 10 yards away.
It's notable that they're all on your backside.
Yeah, they're all on my back, which means I was not opposing in any way. I was not confronting them, let alone in any way.
And that all happened while you were moving away from
Yes,
it?
they gasped. I turned away to cover my face and to walk away, and I instantly felt that my first leg go numb. I turned to kind of see what was going on before I could even know my second leg got hit, and I instantly began to run and just began to run and push people up the street as fast as I could.
Your last name spelled?
It's LANZENDORFER.
You're a student?
No, I'm just a resident of Pittsburgh. I attended ITT Technical Institute.
What's your first name again?
Nathan.
And how old are you?
I'm 23.
Nathan, did you ever hear a order to disperse?
No, on 5th Street there was no order to disperse. They began coming up the street, and when they were about 15 yards away, they deployed the first smoke grenade, and that's when people began to panic. And that's when I turned away to flee, and I got shot both legs and just instinctively ran. And that's the second 2 were farther away. They aren't as bad, but still, like, I've been through a lot of physical pain, mental pain, and anguish. I feel sympathy for anybody that's going through anything like I did, and I want them to come forward, contact the ACLU, and do anything they can. This is unjust, it's unfair. I was peaceful, I've done nothing wrong.
How did you find yourself on 5th and Thackeray?
What's that?
How did you find yourself on 5th and Thackeray?
We were on Forbes, and we were just following a group of people. We made it up the end of Thackeray, or up near Thackeray, and they actually had it blocked off and started pushing up, so we started to back up, and then before we knew it, there was smoke grenades being tossed, and 4 shots fired. And, as you can see, there's 4 shots on me, so pretty accurate.
Dr. Harvey Holden, Professor of Sociology, IUP. I'm presently on sabbatical, working with the G20 protests. I'm in Squirrel Hill. I'm a member of the board of the Thomas Merton Center, and I have been a peace guide through all these activities. I was not only there on Friday night, but I was a peace guide at the march on Friday afternoon. The most ominous group was in the center, playing Duck, Duck, Goose. That was the most ominous thing that was going on. And the reason it was ominous was because they were moving quickly. They could have bumped into each other. In the old days, a police officer would have come and said, "Oh my gosh, you're moving so quickly. Maybe you hurt yourself, children of Pittsburgh." Oh my. But no. Now, squadrons of terror begin to emerge. There was no provocation. I escaped, I was lucky. I escaped between dorms, underneath dorms somehow, onto Bouquet and into the O. I sat at the O and I watched maneuvers outside. Police with equipment so laden that one fell down, they had to lift him up. 2 people had to lift him up. Cocking their guns, charging up the streets, lining all the streets with police. If you've seen footage of third world countries, if you've seen the terror there, if you've seen the things that you've learned to be disturbed about, you need to be disturbed about that now. Because that's what I saw. We didn't know whether a bullet was going to come through the window, but we were still the lucky ones. My contention is that this was an opportunity for the police to try their new weapons, to prepare for the next city. That this action was not designed to catch anyone who had broken the law. Because we were moving around the crowd. If my colleague had her way, she would have been there, we would have been arrested. As we moved through the crowd, we saw only peaceful people. And what happened here is the University of Pittsburgh was absent. There was no representative there. There were no police there. They were complicit in this action by the police against their own students. And I'm not talking about individual police. I'm talking about a concerted action where the behavior of individual police was either sanctioned by the police department formally or informally. The degree of abuse is not something that police can do on their own. Although violations of individual police should be prosecuted, it's clear that these strategies were created at the very highest levels. That the children and the residents of Pittsburgh were subjected to militarization of their streets, to arrest, to danger, to all these awful things. And we are saying that all those who are responsible for implementing this strategy must be fired and prosecuted to the very highest level of the law. Moreover, we will use any measure necessary to see that this is done, that the career of anyone who acts to suppress this investigation will be terminated, and they will fight against militarization of our streets. Thank you.
My name is David Meyer, and I'm a resident of Squirrel Hill, member of the G20 Media Support Team, G20media.org, as well as Save Our Civil Liberties, a project at the Thomas Merton Center, and finally the Three Rivers Climate Convergence, one of the plaintiffs in the earlier 2 lawsuits, as many of you in the media might recall, in August and September. And yeah, we'll be filing for another lawsuit too. First, I want to thank Indie Media, especially those from out of town, who organized this press conference and to show us this video. And I'd also like to thank a couple members of the mainstream media who also demonstrated their concerns and efforts, so much so, in particular, I want to thank Sadie Gurman for her courageous efforts to document what was going on, and yet she was arrested as well. And also Carl Prine in his investigative reporting, which has shed light on the many of the city's prevarications and indeed outright perjury throughout the course of our legal battles. We warned them, and they didn't listen to us. We went to a public hearing that Beth Pinniger from the Citizens Police Board organized, and experts from the National Lawyers Guild and ACLU said the tsunami of repression will be coming to town and the city will have to pay through the nose in the end. We warned them that there would be violence, not on the part of activists, but on the part of the police. And we warned them that this was seen in other cities, and you need only look at these examples throughout, from the Federal Trade Area, the Americas, to the national conventions and more, that this was part of a larger model of repression that Pittsburgh was going to experience. And here we are. We still have at least 10 people who are being held. I'd like to see that the police immediately release all prisoners and not issue any retribution for our showing, or Indie Media showing this footage, and immediately release them, drop all charges. And in the case of Three Rivers Climate Convergence, we want the police to return our confiscated property that, as folks might recall, essentially shut down our climate camp in Shenley Park. This despite our having received a permit, this despite having received correspondence that said we could leave our stuff up overnight. And to make matters worse, of course, it's worth noting that even with a permit, some of us tried to gain access to Shenley Park, and were turned away on the Wednesday.
Just to be clear there, okay, in this environment where the police have said, you know, you're doing something illegal, that's why we're arresting you, they had a legitimate permit to be in the park, and when they got there on the ground, the police refused to honor it.
One of the other things that's really important to point out is that, I don't know if Beth is going to speak, but they've been flooded with complaints, and it's really important that the complaints continue to get out there to the Citizens Police Review Board. And it's also important to note that one of the warnings that we issued was that police at Pittsburgh and the Allegheny County already have a pre-existing of police misconduct and violence. And then to compound that with $20+ million and more armed forces in the city than perhaps the history of this city, at least at least as far as since the Homestead strike, this was a recipe for failure. And I'll say it very bluntly. The mayor should be fired. City council should hold his feet to the fire. And all the other public officials who allowed this disaster to take place. And finally, in closing, before turning to Casey here, I want to say that in the case of Three Rivers Climate Convergence, it seems very clear that part of the reason why we were preemptively shut down was perhaps because of our message. Because we did not want to say that Pittsburgh was a model of this bastion of green growth, and that because we wanted to have a sustainability fair that showed the local sustainable solutions as an alternative to the corporate-led greenwashing. And we wanted to show that the very example of the longwall mining to the south and the mountaintop removal in Appalachia and the profiteering of corporations off those mining disasters was one of the core things that was part of our message. And perhaps because of that message, because we challenged the city, that was why they preemptively denied us a permit, they preemptively denied us the ability to camp overnight, and then they confiscated our property and wouldn't even allow us to a site that we had a permit for. So we also want a return of all confiscated property, and of course the indie media property too. And we want people to realize that what Pittsburgh is should not be a model for G20 law enforcement, in the same way it should not be a model for climate justice and environmental justice as well. Thanks.
I'm Casey Capitolo. I'm a resident of East Liberty. Capitolo is C-A-P-I-T-O-L-O. I'm a member of the Anti-War Committee of the Thomas Merton Center, and also with David and Naomi on the Save Our Civil Liberties Working Group, a member of Three Rivers Climate Convergence, and have been working with all the other groups during the G20 activities. We had a very successful march with more than 5,000 people on Friday, and as others have testified, it was perfectly peaceful. The police were completely well behaved. That Friday night, after all this long months of organizing, we were going to Oakland to listen to a concert, and the minute we stepped out of our car, we were swept up into a full-scale militarized operation, occupation, and invasion of a Pittsburgh neighborhood. No exaggeration there. I've been at this business for more decades than I can tell. I have been in literal war zones, both urban and in actual wars in other countries, and this was a full militarized warfare scenario. I was also with David in July when we testified in front of the Public Safety Committee of City Council that this indeed would happen, because it has happened in every city that received large-scale weaponry and had a mass of troops and police, all dressed up for a party and nowhere to go. And that was our immediate interpretation when we walked into the scene on Friday night, that there was a full-scale operation going. We remained, 3 of us, peacekeeping, as was our job all along through these. I have been a civilian peacekeeper for 4 decades because there was no presence of the University of Pittsburgh on the scene. No civilians, no Pittsburgh police to help shepherd their students to safety, to help guard their own property. And it is obvious from the email that they sent to their students earlier to stay inside, their duplicity and complicity in an absolutely unacceptable situation. The perimeters of the order to disperse was given on the side of Shenley Park, almost to Roberto Clemente Drive below the law school. Dozens of, actually hundreds and hundreds of people, like Nathan Landstorfer, who's testified, were nearly half a mile away on the other side of the street, were not part of any activity, and had no opportunity to hear any kind of dispersal order. Those of us who were peacekeeping and trying to chill out the situation, we spoke to the chiefs on duty. We spoke to officers of every squad that we came, asking them to show restraint and show some mercy on kids, because we knew there were hundreds and hundreds of kids, because it was a nice Friday night in Oakland. We were not allowed to leave. We were not allowed to go back to our car. And everywhere that we tried to escape, to leave the scene, the perimeters had changed. They'd come back around. This is a very important part to hear. The perimeters in which you could be assaulted, arrested, beaten, or otherwise abused by the police were anywhere that any individual law officer said they were at that moment. And no dispersal orders were given to people. Listen how massive this operation was, completely surrounding Shenley Plaza, and then completely surrounding the area of Oakland, from 5th and Belfield to 5th and Bouquet to Forbes and Bouquet to Forbes and Belfield. That entire area, plus the whole surround of Shenley Plaza, was occupied by hundreds of fully armed and dressed riot police. What I saw happen that night was a police riot. A police riot. Uncontrollable police riot. Now, Dr. Martin Luther King said that a riot is the voice of the unheard. What was unheard from those group of officers? There's a couple of things that maybe happened. Either their chain of command completely failed and squadrons just went out, and they did randomly attack anybody who was on the street. Your reason for being arrested or attacked was being on the street, not involved with anything. Most of the people who were arrested were not Mirandized, they were not read their rights. And as there are millions of photos on YouTube all over the world, this time it can't be silenced. And we have to ask ourselves why, after a relatively successful whole series of G20 activities, for which we had to sue twice, we had to have innumerable press conferences, visits to the mayor's office, to the police, to everybody possible, to guarantee our right to speech and assemble, which were actually guaranteed almost 250 years ago. This was a total failure of the University of Pittsburgh, their chain of command, Chancellor Norderberg, and the Board of Regents of the University of Pittsburgh. I strongly suggest you reach for your checkbooks and call in all your lawyers. We are not going to be silenced, and we will not permit the University of Pittsburgh to terrorize, punish, or persecute its students who were swept up in a situation that was not of their making, as they have already threatened to do. And also, we have numerous witnesses. There was not a single one of them present to try to mediate the situation. Mayor Luke Ravensall and your staff, Public Safety Director Huss, Chief Harper, and your chain of command, we have to say the same thing to you. You should be at this meeting now, right now, to explain your actions. We're calling for a whole entire investigation. We want City Council to hold special hearings, and we also want an independent commission set up by people who are not involved in any local institutions to review this whole situation. It was a full-scale, military-style occupation with incredible use of force against unarmed civilians. And I was one of the persons with David who went there in July to testify. It is in writing, it is on DVD, that this is what will happen. As David showed you on this Miami model, there is a checklist, and we have been following as each set of procedures were carried out. The local authorities were given a playbook by Homeland Security, by the Secret Service, by whoever, and they followed it to the level. But you must ask yourselves why. After the last G20 dignitary, I believe the Japanese Prime Minister, after throwing out that pitch on Friday, when they were gone, why would they choose to leave us in this terrible situation? Not only ruining whatever positive effects the G20 Summit had, myself, quite frankly, I think it should not have been held here. And if they were going to go to this level of armament and military occupation, it should have been held on a military base, where we would not have had to go through all this terrible thing, have to pay for all of this. And now, unfortunately, the University of Pittsburgh, the city of Pittsburgh, are going to be facing tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of lawsuit for their total failure of authority, their total failure to restrain the police, and the attack and the brutalizing, absolutely brutalizing of unarmed and innocent civilians. Arrestees were sexually harassed, they were beaten, they were subject to conditions where they were not allowed to go to the bathroom, not allowed to make that one phone call, never given charges, and were put in situations that they were completely unprepared to deal with. And what did anybody think was going to happen? Is this what a democracy looks like? I don't think so. Thank you very much.
If you said this was nonviolent, there were windows broken. How would you respond to that?
When there were windows broken where?
Thursday night along
Several neighborhoods, including Oak Street.
I think that may have happened. I know that happened in some neighborhoods. But on Friday, I was not there. On Friday night, to my knowledge, there was not a dustbin overturned, a window broken, or anything else. And the key is, in pursuing what they said were suspects. The suspects did not disperse from an original dispersal order. But when you spread the perimeter a half a mile away to people who didn't even know anything was going on down there, and not only, you are not trying to disperse them, you are randomly gassing, tasering, shooting them with beanbags, rubber and pepper bullets, and we saw them right in front of our window go running up and down the street like Keystone Cops, shouting to their commanding people, what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? Told them to get down in attack formation, and they knelt down on the ground, row after row of them, with their weapons out, ready to shoot any kid that came around the corner. That's random. That is specific violence against innocent, unarmed civilians, and it was a military-style operation. No excuse, nowhere to hide, no reason for this to have happened.
What time,
In terms of the
what time
violence-
did this open up?
I believe that the riot police had started to arrive by at least 10 o'clock, 9:30, between 9 and 10 o'clock. Their original order to disperse was about 20 to 11, only in the one area at the bottom of the Shenley Plaza near the Carnegie Library.
In terms of the violence, I would like and encourage and implore the media to investigate and ask this simple question. Does $20 million, to say nothing of the amount of money that the city used to spend on lawsuits, to say nothing of the bodily injury and emotional harm that the police raged on people, how does that compare to a few small broken windows? This was a question we posed at the onset. This is a question we will continue to pursue. Do the math, folks. Does this add up to what, does this equation make any sense? And moreover, a lot of us who are committed to having our voices heard and showing our dissent, we're concerned about the larger violence that came from the G20, a violence which manifested itself not only in terms of the evenings of the Thursday and Friday, and not only in terms of the attempts to silence dissent even before the delegates came to town, but the violence that is waged all around the world by decisions made by these small elite groups of leaders. The violence that results from wars, from militarism, from occupation, from climate change in the global south, to the indigenous communities where uranium mining takes place, to the violence in the Washington County, where an entire lake was swallowed up as a result of longwall mining. This was the violence that we wanted to address, not a few small broken windows. Let's put this into perspective.
Which came first, the violence or the repression?
There's every sight that the presence of hundreds of armed troops in military formations, and there's also live footage from Channel 11 of them beating that woman on the back, who eventually, so frightened, did an action, then her being punched and down to the ground and beaten. It was happening before anybody started any of it.
And it also happened before Thursday. The repression began 2 months ago when they started counting up the money and collecting the money to bring in the armed forces. It started in the week prior when they started harassing Seeds of Peace that Three Rivers Climate Convergence had paid for to come to the city to feed meals. What happened on Thursday and Friday was just the culmination of a long sequence of repression. And there are other speakers, so let's quickly move on here.
Thank you. Is this city really a place where we don't have enough police? We have to use the army these days? Because that's becoming standard at these events. And there's supposed to be something called posse comitatus, which is a post-Civil War thing that you don't use the army to police civilians. And these days, the government signs off on it, and then it happens. This is Dan Feit from Twin Cities Indie Media.
Hi, my name is Dan Feit. My last name is spelled Feidt. And previously I've been a political journalist at the Minnesota State Capitol for 4 years. I think what I wanted to address really quickly, and appreciate everyone for sticking around, is that it's really hard to actually understand the core of the joint operations that involve federal, state, local, and military entities in the sort of joint national security special event structure. And so one item that we were able to obtain from the RNC was the Multi-Agency Communication Center seating chart, which shows all the different corporate entities and federal and military entities that were in the communication center. This document was not publicized intentionally, it was held secret and then was leaked accidentally. So an identical seating chart does exist for the G20, but it's being withheld from you for reasons of the way that these NSSEs are supposed to be structured. One important feature of this is that the Northern Command, the U.S. Northern Command, a new Pentagon command, which was set up after 9/11 as kind of a counterpart of the Department of Homeland Security, but it's also heavily unregulated, has 5 seats in the command center, which is more than any other entity in the command center. However, what Northcom's operations are is very unclear, and in particular, I think when people, a lot of charges are going to be placed against people, but it'll be very, very difficult for defense attorneys to obtain any information about what the military was doing. Like, for example, it'll be virtually impossible for defense attorneys to get the contents of radio transmissions between National Guard units and Northcom or other agencies. That type of information, which in a constitutional republic should be available for a person's defense, will probably not be obtainable. Likewise, when I was out on the street, I asked a lot of public officials who were photographing people, are the photographs you're taking going to be available for defense attorneys? Are these public records? No one was willing to admit that these would be available to defense attorneys or be public records. So the Posse Comitatus Act basically says that the military will not execute the laws of the United States, and then they have to basically create special exceptions if they want the military to be deputized or be active in executing the laws. Now, another unit of the Pentagon is called the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and in the information that I've provided you, I have some basic background information about what the NGA is, what they do. They basically provide the master geographic intelligence for Pentagon operations as well as national security special events. And in particular, the NGA has to get a special legal exception called the Proper Use Memoranda in order to use military technology against American citizens. And we've never been able to get the proper use memoranda for the Republican National Convention, but it must exist because otherwise it seems the NGA's activities would be illegal and unconstitutional. And so these are the types of elements that compose the legal framework of a national security special event. And again, and the thing about NSSC is no one is really in charge or accountable. Another important factor about this that has raised notice worldwide is the use of the long-range acoustic device, or LRAD system, which has never been used against demonstrators in the United States, and has only been used in the nation of Russia in previous years against demonstrators. Who decided that the LRAD was acceptable? Who has to take accountability for using the LRAD? Who is trying to adjust the norms of our society to say that LRADs should be used in demonstrations? That's the kind of concrete decision and transparency which this whole thing seems to be designed to obfuscate. Those are basically some overarching things. There's a lot of layers of details. But the point is that how can anybody be charged with crimes committed in this situation when they can't defend themselves fairly because all these different types of information are behind these organizational firewalls? How can anybody, in a constitutional republic, the government has to provide exculpatory information that may help you in court, and it seems like the whole system is designed to put walls between that and the defense attorneys. And the other thing really quickly is that there's one of the things I included in the information packet was stuff about the difference between law enforcement intelligence and national security intelligence. And an NSSE event is kind of somewhere in this strange gradient between militarized and sort of, very unusual intelligence operations as opposed to how the way the police normally work, which is to some extent pretty well understood in this country. And so it's pretty complicated stuff, and it's really hard to track down the primary source documents that lay out the rules and regulations and everything. Another important question is whether or not the U.S. Army was doing any kind of intelligence functions at this, and the operative Army regulation for intelligence activities is 381-10. Is the U.S. Army regulations for intelligence activities, including domestic intelligence activities. And so officials need to be very transparent and clear if the Army was operating in any way under regulations 381-10, which you can get on the internet. And basically, yeah. So in other words, the whole thing is very complicated. It's hard to find these documents. The RNC, we've been digging up this stuff for months, and it's a similar kind of thing at the G20. So I can provide further details, but I know you all have very busy things, so thank you very much.
Sorry, this is Jessica McPherson from Pittsburgh Indie Media.
Now, I just have something pretty basic and simple to say, which is that I'm really angry to see that this stuff happened, and I'm really angry that we have to spend our time discussing it. I mean, we, Pittsburgh Indie Media, we set up a whole framework during the G20 for coverage of the substantive issues that people were raising in protest. People are angry about development policies in other countries. People are angry about the military policies of this country. And I just want to remind everybody what the point of freedom of the press and freedom of assembly is. It's to enable a society in which we can have a civic debate about these issues, no matter what your thoughts are on them. Our society was designed to allow a civic debate, and that is what is being shut down. We are all spending our time talking about things that never should have happened, and we are not having a civic discussion. So, I mean, and there's hours and hours of footage that we have on our website, audio, video, indiepgh.org, that is documenting all the articulate, passionate, concerned, substantive issues that people raised. We're not talking about that, and I'm angry about it.
Mobile broadcast news.
The end of Thackeray, or up near Thackeray, and they actually had it blocked off and started pushing up, so we started to back up, and then before we knew it, there was smoke grenades being tossed, and shots, 4 shots fired. And, as you can see, there's 4 shots on me, so pretty accurate.
Dr. Harvey Holden, Professor of Sociology, IUP. I'm presently on sabbatical, working with the G20 protests under the Squirrel Hill. I'm a member of the board of the Thomas Merton Center, and I have been a peace guide through all these activities. I was not only there on Friday night, but I was a peace guide at the march on Friday afternoon. The most ominous group was in the center, playing Duck, Duck, Goose. That was the most ominous thing that was going on. And the reason it was ominous was because they were moving quickly. They could have bumped into each other.
Christy, your arm again, please. What do I say?
But we were gassed. I was shot 4 times within 5 seconds. We ran up to North Bouquet to escape it, and actually were being gassed from that side as well. Students started jumping up onto the lich-filled deck. It's a 7-foot jump. People were climbing up onto it. They began gassing onto the deck. Students started fleeing into the towers. As much gas as students were going into the building. Everybody was coughing. Girls were crying. They detained us in there for 45 minutes and didn't let us go. They came in, picked a few people out, detained them, and then anybody that lived off campus, they let go. I eventually made my way to the original hot dog shop where I was recommended to get medical treatment for my wounds. I eventually went to the UPMC Presbyterian. I'm 23.
Nathan, did you ever hear a order to disperse?
No, on 5th Street there was no order to disperse. They began coming up the street, and when they were about 15 yards away, they deployed the first smoke grenade, and that's when people began to panic. And that's when I turned away to flee, and I got shot both legs and just instinctively ran. And that's the second 2 were farther away. They aren't as bad, but still, like, I've been through a lot of physical pain, mental pain, and anguish. I feel sympathy for anybody that's going through anything like I did, and I want them to come forward, contact the ACLU, and do anything they can. This is unjust, it's unfair. I was peaceful, I've done nothing wrong.
How did you find yourself on 5th and Thackeray?
What's that?
How did you find yourself on 5th and Thackeray?
We were on Forbes, and we were just following the group of people. We made it up I was one of the many people that fell victim to the extreme, excessive brutality the police inflicted upon us. We were on 5th and near Thackeray when they began to gas a non-opposing group of people who, without warning, We instantly began to panic. I turned to flee the area and I instantly got shot in my right leg.
Stand up and show your legs, both legs.
What were these, rubber pellets?
Yeah, I got shot in my right leg.
Can you stand in the chair maybe?
And show your arm.
Also my back of my arm. And received medical treatment for 4 contusions.
Do you have any idea how far away the muzzle was when you were shot?
The first 2 on my knees was at least no more than 10 yards away.
It's
And
notable that they're all on your backside.
Yeah, they're all on my back, which means I was not opposing in any way. I was not confronting them, let alone like, in any way.
And that all happened while you were moving away from
Yes,
it.
they gasped. I turned away to cover my face and to walk away, and I instantly felt that my first leg go numb. I turned to kind of see what was going on before I could even know my second leg got hit, and I instantly began to run and just begin to run and push people up the street as fast as I could.
Your last name spelled.
It's LANZENDORFER.
What's your first name?
No, I'm just a resident of Pittsburgh. I attended ITT Technical Institute.
What's your first name again?
Nathan.
And how old are you?